An 11-year-old exposed a bank scam. They tried to crush her unaware. She was a genius. Welcome back and enjoy the story. At just 11 years old, Fiona Urquhart could see patterns that others missed. Numbers, behaviors, tiny details, hidden in the noise of everyday life. But no one at the grandiose Platinum Bank could have imagined that this small, serious-looking girl would expose a scheme they had carefully hidden for years. Fiona wasn't supposed to be there. She had only accompanied her grandmother, who needed to withdraw her life savings to pay for her rising medical bills. The line was long, the atmosphere sterile, the employees all wearing polished smiles, kind too polished. Fiona's sharp eyes caught it instantly, the way one advisor steered older customers toward private rooms, the way they whispered about special opportunities and exclusive investments, the way forms were signed quickly, without real explanations. When a frail woman, Mrs. Edmonds, well into her 80s, was led toward the back, Fiona felt her instincts scream. She tugged on her grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma," she whispered urgently, "something's wrong." Her grandmother, tired and overwhelmed, shook her head. "Don't worry, sweetheart, it's just business." But Fiona couldn't ignore it. Quietly, she slipped away and pressed herself against the door of the private room. Inside, she heard the advisor's voice, syrupy and slow. "Just sign here, ma'am. It's a simple investment. Your money will grow safely. Trust us." Mrs. Edmonds hesitated, her hand trembling over the pen. Fiona burst into the room. "Don't sign that!" she cried, startling everyone. "It's a scam. You're moving your money into a private, uninsured account. If something happens, you lose everything." The room froze. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. The confrontation in the private room escalated quickly. The advisor's face flushed crimson as he tried to regain control of the situation. "Young lady," he sputtered, straightening his designer tie with trembling fingers, "this is a private financial consultation. You have no business interrupting." Fiona stood her ground, her small frame seemingly growing taller with resolve. "Mrs. Edmonds," she said, ignoring the advisor completely, "the document you're about to sign transfers your savings to an uninsured investment account. The fine print waives your rights to federal deposit insurance protection." Mrs. Edmonds blinked, in confusion, her weathered hand still clutching the pen. But Mr. Blackwell said this was completely safe. The bank manager was summoned, a tall woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. She entered the room with the confidence of someone used to intimidating others into submission. "What seems to be the problem here?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. Before the advisor could speak, Fiona stepped forward. "You're targeting elderly customers and tricking them into moving their federally insured savings into high-risk, uninsured investments without proper disclosure." The manager's practiced smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "Little girls shouldn't meddle in adult business," she said softly. "Perhaps you should find your guardian and leave complex financial matters to professionals." Fiona's grandmother appeared in the doorway, breathless and worried. "Fiona, I've been looking everywhere for you." The room seemed to shrink as the tension grew. What had begun as a quiet afternoon at the bank was quickly becoming something far more significant, a collision between an 11-year-old's keen perception and a financial institution's carefully constructed facade. Mrs. Edmonds looked from Fiona to the financial advisor, confusion written across her wrinkled face. "Is what she's saying true? Is my money not going to be protected?" The walls of the small consultation room felt like they were closing in. Anyone watching closely would have noticed the slight twitch in the manager's otherwise composed expression. Would Fiona's intervention be dismissed as a child's misunderstanding, or had she just pulled the first thread that would unravel a much larger deception? The fate of countless elderly customers' life savings hung in the balance, and an 11-year-old girl was all that stood between them and financial ruin. What would happen next was about to change lives forever, especially Fiona's. The next morning, Fiona sat silently at the breakfast table, picking at her cereal as her mother paced back and forth, speaking urgently into the phone. The local newspaper lay open beside her, its headline sending chills down her spine. Local girl disrupts routine banking. Platinum Bank considers legal action. Yes, that's right, her mother was saying, tension straining her voice. My daughter was only trying to help an elderly woman understand what she was signing. She paused, listening to the person on the other end. A lawsuit? But she's only 11. Fiona's father sat down beside her, his face grave but his eyes kind. You did what you thought was right, kiddo. That takes courage. But courage felt cold comfort now. After her outburst at the bank, things had spiraled quickly. The manager had ushered Mrs. Edmonds away, assuring her that there was simply a misunderstanding. Fiona and her grandmother had been escorted out, with whispered threats of consequences for disrupting business and making false accusations. Now it seemed those threats weren't empty. Platinum Bank was a powerful institution in Chicago, its gleaming skyscraper dominating the downtown skyline, just as its influence dominated local politics and business. The doorbell rang, making everyone jump. A courier delivered an envelope. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter, demanding Fiona and her family retract any defamatory statements about Platinum Bank's business practices. Fiona's mother ended her call and slumped into a chair. That was the last lawyer on my list. No one wants to take on Platinum Bank. We could just apologize, Fiona's grandmother suggested quietly, guilt etched in the lines of her face. Say it was a misunderstanding. But it wasn't, Fiona insisted, her voice small but determined. They're tricking people, Grandma. They almost tricked Mrs. Edmonds. How many others have already signed those papers? Her father rubbed his temples. Fiona, sweetie, I believe you, but we're talking about one of the biggest banks in the city. We can't afford to fight them. Fiona looked down at the formal letter with its intimidating legal jargon and embossed corporate logo. For the first time since the incident, tears welled in her eyes. She had only wanted to help, and now her entire family was being threatened. Would standing up for what was right cost them everything? The ringing phone broke the tense silence. Her mother answered it cautiously, then her expression changed to surprise. It's for you, Fiona, she said, holding out the receiver. It's Mrs. Edmonds. The bank's response was swift and merciless. By the end of the week, the Torres family had received formal notification of a lawsuit charging them with defamation, business interference, and unauthorized intrusion. The potential damages listed made Fiona's parents go pale. Their modest Chicago apartment, once a haven of warmth and security, now felt like a fortress under siege. Reporters called constantly. Neighbors whispered. Even some of Fiona's teachers seemed to look at her differently. They're trying to make an example of us, her father said one evening after thinking Fiona had gone to bed. She listened from the hallway, heart pounding. They can't allow a child to question their authority. Her mother's voice cracked with worry. Danny's boss called him in today, said having an employee associated with this controversy wasn't good for business. Fiona slid down the wall, hugging her knees to her chest. Her father's contracting job was their main income. They were already stretched thin with Grandma's medical bills. At school, things weren't much better. My dad says your family is just looking for attention, said Mia, once Fiona's closest friend. He says people shouldn't make accusations without proof. But I have proof, Fiona insisted. I've read all the banking regulations. What they're doing violates... You're 11, Mia interrupted, rolling her eyes. How would you even understand that stuff? That was the question everyone seemed to be asking. Online comments called her precocious but confused. A financial analyst on local news suggested she had misunderstood standard investment procedures. Even a child psychologist weighed in, speculating that Fiona might be seeking attention through dramatic behavior. The only bright spot was Mrs. Edmonds. The elderly woman had not only believed Fiona, but had introduced her to her grandson, Greg, a law student at Northwestern. Though not yet qualified to represent them, Greg had been helping Fiona understand the legal documents piling up on their kitchen table. They're counting on intimidating you into silence, he explained during one of his visits. Most people would back down. Fiona looked up from the thick legal brief she was studying. But if what they're doing is wrong, why isn't anyone stopping them? Greg's expression was grim. Banks like Platinum have deep pockets and lots of friends in high places. They've built their defenses over years. Later that night, unable to sleep, Fiona heard her grandmother crying softly in the guest room. "Maybe we should just apologize and settle." "We can't fight this," she whispered to Fiona's mother. Something hardened in Fiona's chest. She had been right about what she saw, and somewhere in all the legal paperwork and banking regulations, there had to be a way to prove it. The next morning, she would begin searching for it. A powerful gust of April wind battered the windows of the Chicago Public Library as Fiona huddled over a borrowed computer. For 3 weeks now, she had spent every afternoon here methodically combing through financial regulations, elder protection laws, and court precedents. Her school backpack had been repurposed, math and science textbooks replaced with printouts, banking codes and legal dictionaries. Her notebook was filled with careful annotations, cross-references, and questions for Greg during his weekly visits. "You should be playing with friends, not buried in all this," the librarian, Mrs. Chen, said softly, placing a hot chocolate beside her. Fiona looked up, dark circles under her eyes. "I don't have many friends left anyway." It was true. The lawsuit had made her a pariah. Parents were worried about their children being associated with the troublemaker family taking on Platinum Bank. Only 2 friends still came around, sneaking visits as if breaking some unspoken rule. Fiona turned back to the screen, scrolling through the Federal Deposit Insurance Act. Something had been nagging at her for days, a connection just beyond her grasp. The weight of what was at stake pressed on her shoulders. Her father's hours had been cut back. Their phone rang with creditors. Her grandmother's medication had been rationed to save money for legal fees. The preliminary hearing was only 10 days away, and Platinum Bank had assembled a team of top attorneys who were demanding summary dismissal of any defense and immediate retraction and damages. And then, buried in subsection 18C of the Elder Financial Protection Act, she found it. The words on the screen blurred as tears filled her eyes. She read it 3 times to be sure. "Mrs. Chen," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "Can I print this entire section?" The librarian looked concerned at Fiona's intensity, but nodded. That evening, when Greg came to review their meager defense strategy, Fiona spread her discovery on the kitchen table. "Look," she said, pointing to the highlighted section. "The bank's investment scheme violates federal elder protection laws, specifically the mandatory disclosure requirements and the prohibition against certain types of risk transfer without documented financial capacity assessment." Greg stared at the documents, then at Fiona, and back to the documents. Slowly a smile spread across his face. "This," he said, his voice filled with disbelief, "this changes everything." For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in the Torres household, but Platinum Bank was still a formidable opponent, and the hearing that would determine everything was just days away. Could they gather enough evidence in time? Would anyone believe an 11-year-old girl over a powerful financial institution? The clock was ticking, and the odds remained stacked against them. Another powerful hook to keep you on the edge of your seat. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with a torrential Chicago downpour that seemed fitting for the grim occasion. The Torres family huddled under shared umbrellas as they climbed the imposing courthouse steps. Waiting at the entrance was their pro bono lawyer, Ms. Patel, who had agreed, with considerable reluctance, to represent them just 3 days earlier. "Remember," Ms. Patel cautioned as they shook rainwater from their coats, "this is just a preliminary hearing to establish if there's enough merit to proceed. The bank's lawyers will move to dismiss immediately." Inside the courtroom, the contrast couldn't have been starker. Platinum Bank's legal team filled an entire table, 5 attorneys in immaculate suits, armed with leather portfolios and digital tablets exuding confidence. At the adjacent table sat only Ms. Patel, Fiona, and her parents. The bank's lead counsel, Mr. Harrington, cut an imposing figure as he rose to speak. "Your Honor, this case represents nothing more than a regrettable misunderstanding, inflamed by social media and sensationalist reporting. Our motion to dismiss is based on the simple fact that an 11-year-old child, however well-intentioned, cannot possibly comprehend the complexities of financial regulations she claims were violated. The judge, an older woman with penetrating eyes, glanced at Fiona. And the defense? Ms. Patel stood, clutching the folder Fiona had prepared. Your Honor, before presenting our response to the motion to dismiss, we'd like to submit new evidence that dramatically changes the nature of this case. Mr. Harrington scoffed. Last-minute theatrics are hardly— I'll allow it, the judge interrupted, extending her hand for the documents. As the judge read through Fiona's findings, her expression transformed. What began as professional interest deepened into concern, then outright alarm. She glanced up at the bank's legal team, then back to the papers. Mr. Harrington, she said finally, are you aware that these investment practices appear to violate Section 18C of the Elder Financial Protection Act? The confident smirk on the attorney's face faltered. Your Honor, without seeing the specific documents in question, they're right here, the judge said, holding up the evidence, and they suggest a pattern of targeting elderly clients for conversion of federally insured deposits into uninsured high-risk investments without proper disclosures or capacity assessments. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Furthermore, the judge continued, there are sufficient grounds here to warrant not just dismissal of the bank's suit against the Torres family, but potentially a separate investigation into Platinum Bank's practices. The bank's attorneys huddled in urgent, whispered consultation. Fiona sat very still, hardly daring to breathe. Beside her, her father squeezed her hand, his eyes glistening with pride. By the end of that day, everything had changed. The judge not only dismissed all lawsuits against Fiona and her family, but ordered an immediate investigation into Platinum Bank's practices. The story exploded across Chicago news outlets, then national ones. 11-year-old financial genius saves dozens from massive bank scam. Little girl exposes billion-dollar corruption and wins. Reporters crowded around the courthouse steps, shouting questions. Mrs. Edmonds pushed through them to embrace Fiona, tears streaming down her face. You saved more than just my savings, dear. You saved my dignity. In the days that followed, the full scope of the bank's scheme came to light. Dozens of elderly customers came forward with similar stories. Regulatory authorities descended on Platinum Bank. By the week's end, the CEO had resigned, and several executives faced charges. Fiona was flooded with recognition, a special commendation from the mayor, scholarship offers, even a personal letter from the Attorney General. Have you or someone you know ever stood up against something wrong when everyone else said to, stay quiet? Drop your answer in the comments below. The Torres apartment now overflowed with flowers, cards, and interview requests. Local news vans were parked outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the banking prodigy of Chicago. But amid the chaos, Fiona found moments of quiet reflection. The victory had come at a cost. Weeks of stress had deepened the lines on her parents' faces. Her grandmother still needed expensive medical treatments, and Fiona herself had missed a month of normal childhood experiences, buried instead in legal documents and adult concerns no 11-year-old should have to shoulder. Yet something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of the world. Systems that seemed untouchable could be changed. Truth, when pursued with determination, could prevail against seemingly impossible odds. What will you do now? A reporter asked her during a brief interview her parents had finally permitted. Fiona considered the question carefully. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else, she said, not just at this bank, but anywhere. That evening, as the media frenzy continued outside their building, the Torres family gathered around their small dining table for the first relaxed meal they'd shared in weeks. Her toast, her father said, raising his water glass, to our Fiona who saw what was wrong and wouldn't stay silent. Her mother smiled tearfully, and who somehow understood banking regulations better than the bankers. Fiona blushed, but inside a new confidence was blooming. The path ahead wasn't clear yet, but wherever it led, she knew she would never again doubt her ability to make a difference. The media buzz continued for weeks. Platinum Bank's headquarters, once a symbol of financial prestige in downtown Chicago, now stood as a monument to corporate malfeasance as federal investigators came and went through its revolving doors. Each news report revealed more about the scope of the scheme. Dozens of elderly victims across multiple branches, stretching back nearly 5 years. For Fiona, return to normalcy proved challenging. Some students at school now regarded her with awe, while others, particularly those whose parents worked in finance, maintained a cool distance. Teachers didn't quite know how to treat her either. How do you assign homework to a student who had just outwitted a team of corporate attorneys? It's weird being famous for reading boring financial rules, Fiona confided to her restored friend Mia as they walked home from school one crisp afternoon. Mia laughed. Only you would think those were boring. My dad tried to explain what you found to me and my eyes glazed over after 10 seconds. Despite the disruption, life was improving for the Torres family. Fiona's father had been offered a better job by a construction company owner who'd been impressed by the family's integrity. Several of her grandmother's doctors had worked out payment plans for her treatments, and a small but reputable law firm had approached them about filing a class action suit on behalf of all the affected elderly customers, with the Torres family receiving compensation as initial whistleblowers. But the most significant change came in the form of an unexpected phone call from the office of Congresswoman Diaz, who represented their district. She wants to meet you, Fiona's mother said, hanging up the phone with a look of disbelief. The Congresswoman is working on new legislation to strengthen elder financial protections, and she wants your input. Fiona blinked. My input? But I'm just the person who found a loophole that experts missed, her father finished, beaming with pride. Don't sell yourself short, Fiona. Your perspective matters. The meeting was set for the following week at the Congresswoman's local office. As the day approached, Fiona's stomach churned with nerves. She'd prepared extensively, reviewing her notes and research, but still felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. What if I say something stupid? She worried aloud as her mother helped her select an outfit. Her mother paused, folding a cardigan. Fiona, do you remember what you told us when we wanted to give up the fight against the bank? You said, I know what I saw, and it was wrong. Trust that same instinct now. The Congresswoman's office was warm and welcoming, with none of the intimidating grandeur of the courthouse. Congresswoman Diaz herself, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted Fiona with genuine respect. I've been following your story closely, she said, gesturing for Fiona to take a seat. And I have to say, I'm impressed, not just by your intelligence, which is remarkable, but by your courage. For the next hour, they talked about the loopholes Fiona had discovered, the patterns she'd observed in the bank's targeting of vulnerable seniors, and potential ways to strengthen regulations. The Congresswoman's aides took copious notes. You know, the Congresswoman said thoughtfully as their meeting drew to a close, we need more people like you in public service, people who can spot problems others miss and who care enough to speak up. Fiona blushed at the praise, but felt a surge of purpose. Perhaps there was a way to channel her unusual abilities into something meaningful, something that could protect others. What new challenges await Fiona as her unexpected journey into the world of financial justice continues? Will her newfound confidence lead her to tackle even bigger systemic issues? The following months brought changes Fiona could never have imagined. The class action lawsuit against Platinum Bank gained momentum, with over 60 elderly victims joining. Federal banking regulators used Fiona's findings as a starting point for a broader investigation into similar practices at other financial institutions. And the media couldn't get enough of her story. The girl who took down Goliath was how the Chicago Tribune described her in a Sunday feature. A documentary filmmaker had even approached the family about rights to their story. But fame brought complications. Some online commentators questioned whether an 11-year-old could really have understood complex financial regulations, suggesting her parents must have been the real investigators. Others criticized the family for seeking attention or destroying a respected financial institution. Don't read the comments, her father advised, closing the laptop one evening when he found Fiona scrolling through a particularly vicious thread. There will always be people who can't accept that someone your age could be so capable. The criticism stung, but Fiona was developing a thicker skin. What mattered more were the tangible results. Congresswoman Diaz had introduced the Senior Financial Protection Enhancement Act, with several provisions directly inspired by Fiona's insights. One warm Saturday in June, nearly 4 months after the courthouse victory, Fiona sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by brochures from a half-dozen prestigious private schools. Each had offered her a full scholarship. Her academic abilities had never been a secret. She'd been in gifted programs since first grade, but now schools that had previously been financially out of reach were competing for her enrollment. "They all look amazing," her mother said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But it's your decision, Mija. What feels right to you?" Fiona picked up the brochure from Westbridge Academy. Their science program was exceptional, and they emphasized ethical leadership, something that had taken on new meaning for her. But it was across town, far from her current friends and community. "I need to think about it," she said. Later that afternoon, she visited her grandmother, who was recovering from a recent procedure. The medical bills were still substantial, but now they were manageable, thanks to a payment from the initial settlement with Platinum Bank. "Abuela, did you ever make a decision that changed everything about your life?" Fiona asked, helping her grandmother arrange pillows more comfortably. Her grandmother smiled. "When I decided to leave Puerto Rico and come to Chicago, with your mother just a baby and only $200 to my name. I was terrified, but determined." "How did you know it was the right choice?" "I didn't," her grandmother admitted. "But I knew staying where I was meant accepting limitations I didn't want. Sometimes the right path is the one that scares you a little." Fiona nodded, considering this wisdom. The opportunity at Westbridge would open doors she hadn't even imagined existed. But it would also separate her from the familiar world of her neighborhood school. That evening, as she helped her mother prepare dinner, the doorbell rang. To everyone's surprise, it was Mrs. Edmonds, accompanied by several other elderly people. Fiona recognized from news coverage of the bank case. "We hope we're not intruding," Mrs. Edmonds said, "but we wanted to give you something." One of the men stepped forward, holding a small wooden box. "It's not much considering what you did for us, but we wanted you to have this." Inside the box was a beautifully crafted silver pendant in the shape of a balance scale, the symbol of justice. Engraved on the back were the words, "To Fiona, who saw truth when others wouldn't look." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes as Mrs. Edmonds fastened the necklace around her neck. "We pooled together for it," the elderly woman explained. "Some of us would have lost everything if not for you." That night, Fiona made her decision. She would accept the Westbridge scholarship. The path ahead might be challenging and unfamiliar, but she was ready to embrace it, just as she'd embraced the fight against Platinum Bank when everyone said they couldn't win. The final hearing in the Platinum Bank case fell on a brilliantly sunny day in early August. The federal courthouse was packed with spectators, reporters, and dozens of elderly victims eager to see justice served. Fiona, dressed in a simple blue dress with her silver scale pendant gleaming at her throat, sat between her parents in the front row. The settlement being approved was substantial. Full restitution to all victims, plus damages and a fund established to provide financial literacy education for seniors. Former executives faced not only civil penalties, but criminal charges for fraud and elder exploitation. When the judge formally approved the terms, applause erupted throughout the courtroom. Mrs. Edmonds, seated nearby, squeezed Fiona's hand, tears of relief streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Outside, on the courthouse steps where months earlier they had stood in fear and uncertainty, the Torres family now stood triumphant. Reporters shouted questions, photographers' flashes popped, but Fiona felt strangely calm. A journalist pushed forward. "Fiona, now that you've won, what would you say to other kids who see something wrong but are afraid to speak up?" Fiona thought for a moment, the weight of her journey settling into wisdom beyond her years. "I would tell them what I learned," she said, her clear voice carrying across the crowd. "That being young doesn't mean you're wrong. That seeing patterns others miss isn't weird. It's a gift. And most importantly, that the truth might seem small and quiet at first, but if you protect it and fight for it, it can grow powerful enough to change the world." Standing on those courthouse steps, Fiona looked tiny but unbreakable. When another reporter asked if she was afraid when the lawsuit started, She simply smiled and said, "I wasn't afraid of them. I was afraid of a world where the truth could be silenced." And now, thanks to her brilliant mind and unstoppable courage, the world was just a little bit better, and a lot more afraid of underestimating a young genius. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.